Welcome to the Deep Dive. We dig through the research so you get the core insights fast. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, mastering how you express and handle your emotions. Emotional agility. It's about moving past just saying you're fine when, honestly, inside, things might be spinning out of control.
Exactly. Think of it like upgrading from, say, 3 basic paint colors to having the whole spectrum.
Right.
We want to help you move beyond just good, bad, or okay. There's so much more nuance, right? Things like, I don't know, bittersweet nostalgia, or that specific anxiety you get about work stuff.
Yeah.
Being able to name those complex feelings, that gives you a handle on them. It helps basically improve all your relationships, personal, professional, everything.
I think most of us can relate to that problem. The research points out suppressing emotions. I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
Swamped with a huge project telling everyone, oh, I'm fine, totally fine. And then bam, complete burnout. It wasn't until I actually admitted I was struggling that things started to shift.
That's such a classic example. And it shows why just, bottling things up doesn't really work long term. It feels like a fix, but the cost is high. Just acknowledging the struggle, even just to yourself, that's the first real step. But even before you talk about it, there's something else you need to do. Observe.
Observe, like becoming a detective for feelings. Paying attention to the little clues our bodies give off.
Precisely. What are the nonverbal cues telling you? In yourself and in others. Are shoulders hunched up? Is someone avoiding eye contact? Or maybe putting on a really forced smile? These physical things often signal what's really going on underneath, maybe stress or fear way before words come into play. Noticing that's skill number 1.
Okay, so that leads right into our first big topic, emotional granularity. Getting specific. The research suggests we often have this vocabulary gap when it comes to feelings. We stick to the basics.
Yeah, it's called emotional granularity. It's the skill of telling the difference between similar but distinct emotions. Like, are you feeling just vaguely bad, or are you feeling disappointed, or maybe anxious or frustrated? Naming it accurately actually engages the thinking part of your brain. And that alone can dial down the intensity a bit.
It makes me think of like learning about wine. At first, it's all just red wine, but then you learn words like tannic, bold, earthy, and suddenly you can pick out all these different notes. It gets richer. So how does someone build that emotional vocabulary if they've just been saying fine for years?
You kind of have to be intentional about it, like learning any new language, really. A practical tip. Find lists of emotion words they're easy to search for online. Then consciously try to connect those words to your own past experiences. Ask yourself, okay, have I felt melancholy before? When was that? What was going on? Okay. You're essentially wiring that new word to a memory, making your internal emotional language richer and easier to access.
And of course, we can't talk about expressing feelings without touching on culture. The sources really highlight how different cultures have, very different unwritten rules about what's okay to show.
Oh, absolutely. Culture sets the stage completely. In some places, showing sadness openly, maybe even crying in public, is perfectly acceptable, even expected sometimes. But in other cultures, maybe some East Asian contexts, for example, the priority might be on group harmony walk. So people there might be much less likely to openly show anger or disagreement because it could disrupt the balance.
It's not just what you show, but the language itself, isn't it? This part is fascinating. Like the German word schadenfreude, getting pleasure from someone else's misfortune. English doesn't really have one single perfect word for that. Does that mean the feeling itself is experienced differently or less often if we don't have a neat label for it?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? If there's no easy word, does it make the feeling harder to recognize or talk about? And then there are the nonverbal things too. When you're across cultures, a simple pause or silence. In one culture, it might mean respect, deep thought. In another, like maybe a Western business meeting, it could feel awkward, like disinterest. It's this huge hidden layer in communication, and it massively impacts how we connect or misconnect.
Okay, so emotional granularity gives us the words, the labels. What's the strategy for actually managing the feeling once we've named it? That brings us to emotional agility, which sounds like the opposite of getting stuck in those negative loops.
Exactly. Emotional agility is about being willing and able to actually engage with your feelings openly, not pushing them away. It's about movement, flexibility. The best analogy I've heard is trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It takes immense effort, right? And what happens eventually?
It pops up. Probably shoots right out with extra force.
Precisely. Suppressing an emotion is just like that. It will surface later, and often much more intensely.
So instead of wrestling the beach ball, we let it float. We become emotional detectives. The sources outline a kind of 4-step process for this agility thing. Let's walk through it.
Okay. Step 1, Acknowledge. Just notice the emotion without judging it instantly. You might just say to yourself, okay, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. Simple recognition. Step 2 is where the detective work kicks in. Understand or investigate. This is the crucial pause moment.
And what kind of detective questions should we be asking ourselves during that pause?
Good question. You want specific, probing ones, like what exactly triggered this feeling? Not just the meeting, but what in the meeting? Is my reaction based on the actual facts here, or am I maybe running on an old assumption or pattern? What is this emotion trying to tell me? Is there a need not being met? For instance, maybe you're angry someone was late. The investigation might show it's less about the time and more about feeling disrespected. That's a key insight.
Okay, step 3 is self-compassion. I suspect this is where a lot of us stumble. We're good at being kind to friends, not so much to ourselves. How do you practice that when you're already feeling kind of bad about how you reacted?
Yeah, this is often the toughest bit. We sometimes confuse self-compassion with making excuses or being lazy. It's neither. Self-compassion is simply treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who is struggling. So if you investigate and realize, yeah, I overreacted there, the compassionate voice isn't, I'm such an idiot.
Yeah.
It's more like, okay, that was a tough reaction. What can I learn from this for next time? It breaks that shame cycle that keeps you stuck.
Right. Less judgment, more learning. And that leads logically to the last step. Respond intentionally.
Exactly. This is where you use some kind of mindfulness tool. Could be just taking 3 deep breaths, counting to 10, maybe stepping away for a minute. You create this tiny gap, this wedge between the feeling hitting you and your action. And in that space, you get to choose your response based on your values, your goals, rather than just lashing out automatically based on the raw emotion. You become the author of your action.
Being the author. I like that. It means we can actually choose how to handle some of those really tricky emotions. Let's talk strategies for a few common ones. Starting with vulnerability. The research calls it the birthplace of connection, which sounds lovely, but wow, it often feels more like the birthplace of sheer panic. How do we reconcile that?
It feels risky because we equate it with weakness, right? But real vulnerability is actually about courage. The strategy, though, is crucial. You absolutely have to start small. And you have to choose your audience wisely. Don't unload your deepest fear onto a casual acquaintance. Share something low stakes first. Maybe a small worry about a presentation with someone who has actually earned your trust. Someone you know can handle it respectfully.
And the language matters too, doesn't it? Being specific, but maybe less dramatic. So instead of, oh my God, I'm a total disaster, maybe something more like,
I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by this project's deadline right now.
Right.
It's honest, it's specific, but it doesn't sound like you're falling apart. It invites support, not necessarily a rescue mission.
Okay, that makes sense. What about that super common one, anxiety, like right before giving a presentation, those jitters?
Yeah, presentation anxiety, key point here. The goal is usually managing the anxiety, not making it vanish completely. That's often unrealistic. So internally, you need tools to ground yourself. Deep breathing is classic for a reason. Maybe noticing your senses. What can I feel under my feet? What do I hear externally? Practice, practice, practice. So your body knows what to do even if your mind is racing. And in the room, try making eye contact with friendly faces. That little bit of human connection can really break the anxiety loop.
Good tips. Okay, next emotional hurdle. Resentment. The research suggests this is often about unmet expectations, maybe unspoken ones, or feeling like something's unfair, the quiet killer of relationships sometimes.
Resentment is often just disappointment that's been left to fester and recycle. Think about the classic example. Maybe you expect your partner to always do the dishes after dinner. It's not something you've explicitly agreed on, it's just your internal rule. So the one night they don't. That flare of resentment isn't really about the dirty dishes. It's about your unspoken expectation being violated. It's an internal thing projected outward.
That reframing is huge. So you feel the resentment, you do the detective work, realize it's about your rule.
Yeah.
What then? How do you deal with the disappointment that's left?
First, acknowledge the disappointment. Let yourself feel it. But then, and this is practical, contain it. One technique the sources mention is setting a time limit for wallowing. Seriously. Give yourself, say, an hour. Watch that comfort TV show, eat the ice cream, whatever. But when the timer goes off, the wallowing stops. Then you shift gears. What's the lesson here? What do I need to communicate clearly next time? Or what assumption do I need to let go of? You turn feeling bad into something useful.
That transition from feeling to action brings us nicely into our final section. Assertive communication.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to express these nuanced feelings we've identified, we need the right words so people don't just get defensive.
Absolutely. And the cornerstone here is the I feel statement. But the structure matters. It should be something like, I feel X, your specific emotion, when Y happens, the specific observable behavior. Maybe add because Z, the impact or your need. This framing owns your feeling. Crucially, you have to avoid those big blaming generalizations. Words like always, never, or you should, they just put people on guard.
Right, so instead of blurting out, you always leave your wet towel on the floor, it makes me furious, which is kind of accusatory.
You'd say something like, I feel frustrated when I see the wet towel on the floor because I need our shared space to feel tidy for me to relax. See the difference? Focus on the behavior, state your feeling, explain the impact on you.
Much clearer, and much less likely to start a fight. This kind of assertive talk is also key for setting boundaries, right? Protecting our own time and energy. Saying no can be really hard.
Oh, it's often much harder than saying yes, especially if you tend to be a people pleaser. How do you say no respectfully? It usually involves being clear and honest about your current capacity or priorities. So if a colleague asks for help on something that will push you over the edge, don't just mumble, I'm kind of busy. Be more direct, but polite. I understand you need help with that, but I'm currently focused on finishing projects A and B to meet their deadlines. I won't be able to take on something new right now without compromising that work. You're stating your reality, not making a personal rejection.
Okay, that's external boundaries. What about the internal battles? Imposter syndrome comes up a lot. That awful feeling you're just faking it and about to be found out.
Imposter syndrome. It's such a powerful feeling, but it often masquerades as a fact. That's the trap. The main technique here is cognitive reframing. Acknowledge the feeling, okay, imposter syndrome is showing up right now. Then actively challenge the thought behind it. Is there actual concrete evidence that I'm unqualified? Or is this just a familiar feeling? Usually the evidence doesn't support the feeling. It helps to actively focus on your accomplishments. Maybe even keep a running list, big wins, small wins to look at when that feeling creeps in. It counteracts the negative self-talk.
Another internal struggle mentioned is emotional labor. That exhaustion you feel from constantly having to manage or perform emotions, like being relentlessly cheerful in customer service, or always being the family peacekeeper.
Right. Emotional labor is draining because you're suppressing your authentic feelings to meet some external expectation, maybe to avoid conflict or please someone or keep things smooth. First step is just recognizing when you're doing it and why. What's the motivation? Once you see the pattern and feel the fatigue, you absolutely need healthy outlets, ways to process those suppressed feelings so they don't just build up. Exercise, alone time, nature, creative expression, whatever works for you.
And finally, related to all this, is asking for help. Why is it still so hard? Why does it sometimes feel like admitting defeat?
It's deep-seated, I think. Culturally, we often praise extreme self-sufficiency. Asking for help can feel like you failed at that. We really need to reframe it. Asking for help, whether it's with a specific task or getting support for your mental health, isn't weakness. It's actually a sign of self-awareness and strength. It's also how we learn. Think about it. You wouldn't think twice about seeing a doctor for a broken arm. Taking care of your emotional well-being should be seen the same way as smart, responsible self-care.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, we've journeyed from understanding the language of emotions granularity through the strategy of emotional agility and the absolute necessity of self-compassion along the way.
Yeah, and remembering that getting good at this also involves some preventative care. The research talks about avoiding emotional flooding. You know that feeling, where your metaphorical bucket is already full to the brim from accumulated stress, and then one tiny extra thing happens, a small criticism, a minor setback, and boom, the whole thing overflows into a massive reaction.
Right, so prevention means managing the level in the bucket before it gets critical, which points back to those fundamentals. Enough sleep, decent food, moving your body, and, crucially, learning to recognize your personal triggers before you're overwhelmed.
Exactly. And maybe I can leave you, the listener, with one final thought that ties this all together. The sources remind us that comparison is the thief of joy. It's so true, especially comparing your messy, real-time inner life to the curated highlight reels you see on social media. Perhaps the ultimate step in mastering your emotional world isn't about getting rid of difficult feelings altogether. Maybe it's about consciously replacing that inner voice of self-judgment with one of self-compassion. Just consider, what would change if you started treating yourself less like a critic and more like a supportive coach? That shift in perspective, that might be the key to real resilience.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you've been following along, you know we've really dug into emotional agility and the courage it takes for vulnerability. We talked about how just naming a tough emotion can kind of take away its power. So today, we're building on that. really essential stuff.
That's right. Yeah, today's deep dive is about shifting gears a bit. We're moving from just navigating the hard parts to actively cultivating positive emotions. So think generating joy, really getting a handle on fear and anxiety in our, very modern lives, and also unlocking what deep connection actually looks like now. What's really interesting, I think, is how just the sheer speed and amount of information today might be subtly rewiring us, changing how we even feel things.
Rewiring us, that's a big thought. How exactly?
Well, think about it. We're sort of conditioned for hypervigilance, aren't we? Our brains get flooded with potential threats, some real, many maybe not so real. Plus, there's this constant push from hustle culture, always be doing, always be alert. So what happens? We end up focusing, really zooming in on the negative emotions, right? The resentment, the disappointment, we're primed for it. But the good stuff, joy, gratitude, simple contentment, they just kind of float by. We don't pause long enough, really, to let them sink in, to register them neurologically.
It's like joy is treated as this nice little accident if it happens, but not something essential, like a nutrient we actually need. Why is it so easy to just forget to stop and feel good?
Because stopping often feels, unproductive, doesn't it? Maybe even a bit indulgent when everything around us screams, keep striving.
Yeah.
Our wiring is fundamentally for survival, so scanning for danger naturally gets priority over, say, savoring a good moment. The real key, I think, is realizing happiness isn't just something you stumble into if you're lucky. It's more like a skill, an active neurological skill you have to practice consistently.
That lines up perfectly with something I started doing recently. I call it the joy audit. Sounds fancy, but it's ridiculously simple. Just 5 minutes, end of the day, jot down one thing, just one, that genuinely sparks some delight. Could be big, but honestly, it's usually tiny. Like the first sip of coffee hitting just right or finding an unexpected quiet moment.
And that's not just a nice little self-care thing. It's actually highly functional from a brain perspective. You're tapping into what researchers sometimes call attention residue. By deliberately focusing your attention on positive moments, even tiny ones, you're training your brain, specifically the reticular activating system, to start hunting for those highs more actively tomorrow. This active search for the good stuff, it directly boosts dopamine. And that dopamine hit makes you more psychologically resilient when the inevitable lows do come along.
Wow, okay. So the looking for joy actually builds resilience. That's interesting. Maybe you, listening, could try that. Make it a game almost. Finding joy in the really mundane stuff. Like I've started reframing traffic jams. Instead of just frustration, it's like, okay, 20 minutes of uninterrupted podcast time. It completely flips the script on that autopilot grumble, right?
Precisely. You're taking the same external stimulus, the traffic, but changing the internal response. You're replacing frustration with, opportunity. It's a classic reframing technique to override that initial stress reaction.
And speaking of stress, that leads us naturally into its darker cousin, fear and anxiety. Fear at its core is brilliant. It's our primal survival tool. Kept us from becoming lunch for lions, But now, that same alarm system gets triggered by like your phone battery hitting 10% or a vaguely worded email from your boss.
Yeah, that's the modern mess, isn't it? Fear is like that overprotective friend who means well but ends up paralyzing you. So how do we tell the difference between the helpful fear, the don't walk off that cliff kind, and the anxiety that keeps you scrolling bad news at 3 a.m.? The first step is often cognitive, creating some distance. What I mean is actually naming the fear out loud. It sounds simple, but it's crucial. You acknowledge it. Okay, anxiety, I hear you. You're worried about failing this presentation, but then you add the context. This is a possibility, not an actual saber-toothed tiger. That act separates you, the observer, from the feeling itself. Gives you breathing room.
But that physical reaction is so fast, isn't it? The cortisol surge, the heart pounding. It feels like it needs a physical answer.
It absolutely does. And that's where physiological hacks come in. We need to send a clear, all clear signal back to the body. A quick burst of physical activity works wonders. Run up the stairs, do some jumping jacks for 30 seconds, anything to burn off that cortisol spike. It basically tells your nervous system, okay, threat evaded, even if the threat was just in your head. Beyond that quick fix, though, deep breath work is probably the most reliable tool in the box.
All right, we hear about techniques like the 4-7-8-8 breath all the time. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. But what's actually happening physiologically when we do that? Why does it stop that panic spiral?
Okay, so you're essentially performing a manual override on your nervous system. You're hacking the vagus nerve. This nerve is huge. It runs from your brainstem all the way down to your abdomen and controls your parasympathetic nervous system. That's your rest and digest mode. By deliberately slowing down your breath, especially making that exhale longer, the out for 8 part, you're sending a direct signal to the vagus nerve to increase its tone. Higher vagal tone means better heart rate variability, which is basically a measure of your emotional and physical resilience. You are quite literally telling your body, calm down, you're safe.
That's fascinating. A real deep dive into something seemingly simple. Okay, let's shift to maybe a sneakier kind of fear. Procrastination. I always just thought it was laziness, putting off that deadline. But I've learned it's often fear hiding underneath. Fear of not being good enough, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. Procrastination is very often the paralysis that comes from perfectionism. It's fear wearing a lazy costume. The way to bust through that fear, it's usually about action. Radical action, even tiny action, over endless agonizing analysis. You have to break the overwhelming task down into the smallest possible first step, like ridiculously small. Don't aim to write the report. Just aim to open the document and type the title. Once you take that first tiny action, you often break the inertia, the spell of inaction.
And tying back to what we said earlier, sharing that fear, even the fear behind procrastination, can really help. Admitting, I'm stuck because I'm scared this won't be perfect, takes away half its power. It turns this private horror show into something manageable, maybe even relatable. Builds that emotional safety net we talked about.
Exactly. And that need for sharing, for vulnerability, it really is the perfect bridge to our next big topic, connection and love.
Love. Yes, the ultimate emotional cocktail,
Yeah.
right? Exhilarating, terrifying, always complicated, especially now in this swipe right world we live in, where dating can feel a bit like ordering takeout online. Does all this tech actually make finding deep, real connection harder?
I lean towards yes. I think it often does create new barriers to real chemistry. Think about it. Technology tends to turn connection into a data-driven checklist. Height, job, hobbies, a quantified vibe check. It encourages us to bypass the messy, slow burn magic that can happen when you just meet someone in person and navigate that initial awkwardness. We end up chasing these quick dopamine hits from getting a match instead of investing in the deeper, slower reward of actual intimacy.
And the whole ghosting phenomenon that's become so common, it feels like emotional whiplash, but with zero explanation or closure, just poof, gone. It's abandonment made easy by tech.
Precisely. And the danger is that it can train us subtly to view people as disposable, as commodities, which obviously directly undermines our ability to commit, to empathize, to build something lasting.
So if we want to reclaim something more authentic, maybe it means consciously stepping offline more, embracing the potential awkwardness. I like the idea of a simple rule. Commit to one actual in-person coffee date a week. Could be platonic, could be romantic, doesn't matter. Just forced real-world interaction. That's often where the genuine sparks happen, right? Because you can't hide behind a perfectly curated profile.
Yes, but underpinning all of that, the absolute non-negotiable foundation for any healthy connection with someone else is self-love. If you don't genuinely enjoy your own company, if you don't feel relatively whole on your own, it's very hard to invite someone else into your space without falling into unhealthy patterns. Like codependence, you really do have to fill your own cup first.
Which means taking self-care seriously, not just as a buzzword, but as active maintenance. For me, sometimes that looks like literally scheduling date nights with myself. Bubble bath, maybe a gloriously bad rom-com, absolutely zero judgment allowed. Is about active recharging, not just, pampering.
And alongside romantic love and self-love, we absolutely have to talk about platonic love. Friendships. They are such underrated emotional gold. We need to nurture those connections actively, like their oxygen. Prioritize those weekly calls. Send those random thinking of you texts. Because those friendships, they're often the vital buffer that gets us through inevitable heartbreaks and instability elsewhere.
Which brings us right to it.
Yeah.
Heartbreak and loss.
Yeah.
When it happens, when your heart feels like it's gone through a blender, what's the healthiest way to actually process that pain without immediately jumping onto a dating app for a rebound or binge watching 3 seasons of something to numb out?
The absolute key is non-avoidance. You have to, unfortunately, feel it fully. And yeah, it's deeply uncomfortable. One thing that can help create a sense of closure, especially when it's messy, is using cathartic rituals, like writing a totally raw, uncensored Dear Ex letter. Get everything out. Crucially, you never send it. Then you physically destroy it. Burn it safely, shred it, tear it up. That symbolic act can really help the brain process and file away the experience.
And therapy, of course, can be invaluable here, helping to reframe the pain, shifting the focus from, why did this happen to me, to something more like, okay, what did this teach me about my needs, my boundaries? What do I want differently next time? Turning the suffering into, into growth fuel.
Exactly. It's about consciously integrating that pain into your story, making meaning from it, not just trying to erase it or pretend it didn't sting.
That whole idea of integrating complexity and naming things accurately,
Mm-hmm.
it leads us really nicely into thinking about culture. We've been touching on emotional granularity, the ability to name subtle differences in feelings. How do different cultures, different languages shape what we even feel or what we think we're allowed to feel or talk about?
Oh, language is like a container for emotion. It shapes what we perceive and how we express it. Think about the contrast in expressing joy. You have, say, the very communal, physically expressive joy you might see in fiestas or storytelling circles in many Latin cultures. Big, shared, outward. Compare that to the classic British stiff upper lip approach, where cheerfulness might be more reserved, more internal, stoicism valued over effusiveness.
That's a really clear contrast. And yeah, when you look beyond English, you find these amazing words for feelings we don't quite have a label for. I remember learning about the Brazilian Portuguese word saudade. It's often translated as longing or melancholy, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's like an aching for something or someone absent, but mixed with a kind of bittersweet appreciation for having known it at all. Our word missing feels so flat in comparison.
It absolutely does. Saudade isn't just sadness. It's got this nostalgic weight, this almost existential ache. You might feel it watching a stunning sunset, knowing the moment is passing, but also deeply appreciating the beauty while feeling the ache of its transience. It's a dual emotion. And it exists, culturally, partly because the word exists to hold that complex feeling. This is why borrowing words can be so powerful. Think about how hygge from Danish entered our vocabulary. That idea of intentional, cozy, almost ritualized contentment and connection. Giving it a name helps us recognize and cultivate it.
So borrowing these words literally expands our emotional palette. Okay, let's give the listener an actionable hack for this, an emotional granularity practice. Maybe call it upgrading your feels OS.
I like that. Upgrading the operating system for your feelings.
Right, so pick one of these foreign emotion words, maybe saudade, maybe hygge, maybe another one you find, and commit this week to just noticing, maybe journaling briefly, about a moment in your own life where that specific word feels like the perfect fit. Forcing yourself to articulate that nuance actually expands your internal emotional vocabulary.
And this kind of learning, this emotional literacy, really needs to start early with children. It has to go way beyond just telling kids to use your words. We need to model nuanced emotional states ourselves, like saying, I'm feeling frustrated because this puzzle is tricky, but I'm also feeling excited about figuring it out together. That normalizes holding complex, even seemingly contradictory feelings at the same time. It shows it's okay.
Yeah, using games can help too, like emotion charades or spinning a feelings wheel. Makes it dynamic, not like a lecture. Imagine a world where more people were truly fluent in understanding and expressing their own complex inner lives.
It would fundamentally change things, wouldn't it? Conflict resolution, the depth of our relationships, everything.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. We've covered a lot of joy, fear, love, culture. What's the single biggest takeaway you hope people get from this deep dive?
For me, it boils down to this. Emotions aren't just random noise or obstacles to overcome. They are incredibly specific signals, data. They're giving you real-time information about your needs, your values, your environment. So the call to action is tune in, name them with as much precision as you can, and then, crucially, share them appropriately. Do that and watch your personal resilience and your connections really start to soar.
That's powerful. Mine is maybe a bit simpler. Practice joy. Like it's your job.
Yeah.
Your most important job. Because life is just way, way too short for muted colors.
Well said. A really powerful sentiment.
But before we wrap up, as always, we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Something to explore for yourself based on our chat today. So here it is. What is one emotion? It can be positive, negative, or maybe one of these newly discovered nuanced terms that you were committing to explore or just observe more closely within yourself this week. Give that some thought. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive. Until then, feel freely. Welcome back to the deep dive. If you feel like you're trying to read a 10,000-page book while riding a roller coaster, well, you are definitely not alone. The modern world is chaotic, and today we are extracting the blueprints for something really critical, leveling up your long game in emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
We've pulled together a stack of research on building resilience, the science of empathy, and some pretty deep-seated healing methods.
It's necessary work, truly. We're not just summarizing here. We're trying to provide like a manual for navigating all this chaos.
Right.
Covering how to build these fortifying rituals, understand the ripple effects of connection, and maybe address those deep wounds that might be preventing real growth.
And crucially, we're asking, how does our emotional infrastructure, hold up in a future increasingly driven by AI and these sophisticated bots?
That's a big question.
It is. But before we dive into those practical tools, let's just nail down what we mean by resilience, because the word gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah, it does. And we need to move past the typical kind of exhausting definition of just bouncing back. That implies you're just a rubber ball getting knocked down. The true definition, the one that really sustains people long term, is more like bending without breaking.
Bending without breaking.
Yeah.
I like that.
Think of bamboo in a storm,
Yeah.
It's flexible, it's responsive, but it's also deeply rooted. That's the goal.
Our mission today, then, is to help you build that deep root system. We're extracting the actionable knowledge, giving you the scientific context you need. So let's jump right in. Daily habits, these resilience rituals. How do they help decode emotional chaos?
Well, when you look at the most resilient people, it's interesting. They aren't necessarily the toughest in that traditional sense. They're the most self-aware. They actually have routines for like emotional maintenance.
Okay, so one practice I found really effective in the sources we looked at is called the rewind ritual. It's quite specific.
Okay, tell me more.
Instead of letting all the weekly chaos just blur into one big stressful mess, you intentionally carve out time, maybe, say, 20 minutes Sunday evening, to replay the week's high-stress moments.
Right, and this is where we have to be careful, isn't it? Because for a lot of people, reviewing stress just leads straight into rumination, that negative loop.
Exactly. How do you stop that?
Yeah.
That's the key difference. The goal isn't to dwell or, re-experience the negativity. It's more like performing emotional forensics.
Emotional forensics, okay.
Yeah, you're trying to decode what truly knocked you off balance.
Yeah.
For instance, you might realize that that white-hot rage you felt after a client critique, it wasn't actually anger at their feedback.
It was likely something deeper masking itself.
Totally. When you rewind, you realize the frustration was actually, say, fear of failure just dressed up in a really loud costume. And by naming the true underlying emotion, the fear in this case, you kind of neutralize the reactive power of the frustration. That move from feeling frustrated to identifying fear, it's critical.
And that move has real science behind it. Reflective practices like that aren't just, therapeutic talk. They literally rewire your neural pathways.
How so?
Well, when you name an emotion accurately, you shift brain activity. You move it away from the primal reactive amygdala, and you bring the executive function of the prefrontal cortex online.
Okay.
You're essentially turning reactivity into sustained responsibility. You gain maybe just seconds of delay between the stimulus and your action, but that's often all you need to change your future behavior.
I love that phrasing, turning reactivity into responsibility. That's definitely an advanced skill.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about those moments when the mental loop is just too tight and you need a fast physical release? What did the sources recommend there?
Yeah, the essential counterpoint to that mental rewind ritual is what we could call the nature reset.
Nature reset. Yeah.
It's like a primal anchor for an overwhelmed nervous system. Our lives are so cerebral now, so screen-bound, we often forget our basic biology. Going outside, even just a 10-minute solo walk in a local park, and crucially, leaving the phone behind it, acts like free, fast therapy.
Why does simply being outside work so well, efficiently?
It's a whole cascade of benefits, actually. Primarily, it involves reducing cortisol, that stress hormone, and boosting oxytocin release.
The connection hormone.
Exactly. Plus, just grounding yourself, literally feeling your feet on the earth, engages the vagus nerve. That nerve runs all the way from your brainstem down to your abdomen,
Right.
stimulating it through, say, slow, deep breathing, and just being physically present outdoors acts like a brake pedal for your fight or flight response.
Even for someone stuck at a desk all day.
Especially for them, that 10-minute park stroll, maybe at lunchtime, it's really a non-negotiable step toward finding some balance.
Okay, so once we establish our internal footing, those roots we talked about, we then have to look outward. How we connect with others. And that brings us naturally to section 2, empathy. It really is the bridge from isolation to connection, isn't it? But let's be real. Trying to extend empathy in today's deeply polarized world feels, well, inherently risky sometimes.
It absolutely does. When you try to extend empathy towards someone with really challenging or, polar opposite viewpoints, it can feel like you're signaling agreement.
Or worse.
Or worse, just inviting conflict when all you wanted was some kind of connection.
That's why this concept of curious empathy from the research seems like such a potential game changer.
Curious empathy. Explain that.
It requires you to shift the focus. Instead of judging the other person's conclusion, you try to understand their context. It's not about agreeing with them, especially if their views challenge yours, but genuinely asking for their narrative.
Right. And the source material actually provided this beautifully tailored question. It goes something like, help me get this. What shaped that experience or view for you?
Okay, what shaped that for you? What makes that specific phrasing so potent?
Well, it cleverly bypasses the whole ideological debate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you ask what shaped their view, you immediately shift the conversation. It moves from a potential fight over policy or belief to a discussion of, biography, their story.
You're asking for the story, not the position.
Exactly. And in high-stakes situations, this can act almost like disarming a bomb with questions. It asks for vulnerability from them, sure, but it signals radical respect from you first.
That shift from ideology to biography.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful takeaway. And the payoff isn't just felt in, family arguments, right?
Yeah.
It scales up.
Oh, absolutely. The societal benefits are potentially massive. Research, including a lot of work from the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley, consistently shows that intentional empathy training, get this, it cuts conflict in workplace teams by a remarkable 40%.
40%, wow.
Yeah. Think about the implications of that. Less conflict means more psychological safety, probably higher retention rates, and a huge boost to complex problem solving. It can genuinely transform the bottom line.
Okay, that sounds amazing, almost too good to be true. But we have to address the flip side of the empathy trap.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of listeners are probably natural givers, right? And extending empathy often means they end up absorbing way too much emotional input. They get completely drained. The classic emotional sponge.
The emotional sponge definitely needs protection. And that protection comes down to boundaries. Strong, clear boundaries.
How do you mean?
We need to distinguish clearly between sympathy, which is feeling for someone, and empathy, feeling with them. The trap happens when you start feeling like them, basically adopting their stress, their pain, as your own.
So how do you practically set that boundary in the moment when someone's unloading on you?
One technique is to visualize a filter. You consciously decide, I'm going to hear this, I'm going to hold space for this person's emotions, I'll validate their experience,
Okay.
but I am not going to haul their baggage away for them. It sounds maybe a bit detached, but it's actually critical self-preservation.
It's compassionate because you're still present.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You're present, but you avoid that codependency and burnout spiral that ultimately leads to resentment anyway.
Which brings us back to that crucial point.
Yeah.
You absolutely cannot pour from an empty cup.
Bingo. Self-empathy has to come first. You've got to attend to your own deep needs before you can sustainably offer high-quality support to anyone else. It's fundamental.
Right. And if you are practicing that self-empathy first, you're probably strong enough to look at the larger landscape. Which leads us nicely into Section 3, healing deep wounds and collective grief.
Yeah, because let's face it, we are all swimming in this immense kind of chaotic emotional soup right now.
Definitely.
We've got global unrest, political fatigue is real, climate dread, plus the lingering shadow from the pandemic. It is a lot.
And the consensus solution here, from what we've seen, isn't trying to solve all the world's problems by yourself.
Yeah.
It's actually about acknowledging the collective grief first. We have to aggressively avoid that temptation of toxic positivity. Just slapping a smile on everything. Denying the shared struggle just pushes the anxiety inward, makes it worse.
The antidote to feeling overwhelmed by huge global events is often finding what the sources called the shared hum.
The shared hum. Like community.
Yeah, tuning into a community circle, whether that's, virtual resilience roundtables online or just regular group check-ins with friends or colleagues, sharing those feelings of dread or uncertainty actually makes them feel, normal, less isolating.
Anxiety hates company, doesn't it?
It thrives in isolation, but shared vulnerability takes away some of its power.
And we also need to acknowledge the role of humor here, too.
Yeah.
When we feel powerless against these massive forces, we often turn to gallows humor.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that huge wave of viral memes during the lockdown?
Totally constant.
That wasn't just distraction, was it? Laughing together at the sheer absurdity of the collective situation is a form of psychological release. That humor acts as essential emotional glue.
It really does.
Yeah.
Now, shifting slightly, for those deeper individual issues, the traumas that are like the shadows we all carry, big or small, we need to talk about what happens when the body holds the score.
Somatic healing.
Exactly. Somatic healing is about tuning into the physical body because that's precisely where fragmented memories and trauma often get stored, sometimes for years.
Talk therapy is obviously essential, but sometimes it plateaus, maybe because the trauma isn't just stored in the narrative part of the brain, but deeper in the nervous system.
That's right.
The sources highlighted a couple of key methods for this kind of work. The first one is EMDR eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Sounds complex.
It is fascinating, actually. It works directly on the neurological mechanism of memory. The therapist guides your eyes through bilateral stimulation, back and forth movements, basically,
Okay.
which mimics the processing phase of REM sleep. It essentially forces the two sides of your brain to communicate while you're recalling a stuck traumatic memory.
So it's not just recalling the memory, it's changing how it's filed away.
Precisely. It allows the brain to finally integrate that fragmented, unprocessed memory with more adaptive information from the present. It takes that glitchy file that keeps replaying on a loop and helps reboot it. So the memory gets stored properly as something that happened in the past rather than something that feels like it's still happening right now.
Wow. Okay. And the other key method mentioned was yoga therapy, which isn't just like general yoga class stretching, is it?
No, it's much more specific. It involves intentional physical release, often targeting areas notorious for holding chronic tension and stress.
Like where?
Think specifically about the hips or the psoas muscle, that deep core muscle that often contracts tightly during prolonged stress or trauma.
Right.
Specific yoga poses and breathing techniques can target the release of that stored tension. And people often report a genuine, measurable physical shift afterwards, like a lighter feeling in the chest, sudden mental clarity, or just a deeper, steadier breath. The body is literally releasing what the mind couldn't articulate.
Okay, but a crucial note here for anyone listening.
Mm-hmm.
If the emotional issues feel heavy or deep-seated like trauma,
Absolutely crucial. Professional help is non-negotiable. This is really not the time for solo heroics or trying to fix deep trauma by yourself. Find a qualified therapist.
definitely. And finally, on this topic of healing, we have to touch on forgiveness.
Yeah.
We talked about journaling this process. It's so often framed as something you do for the person who hurt you.
Right, which can feel impossible sometimes.
Exactly. But the sources we looked at describe it very differently as an act of radical self-release.
Okay.
Forgiveness isn't about excusing the other person's behavior at all. It's about decoupling your own sense of peace from their apology or their remorse, things you simply cannot control.
It's like emotional decluttering then, taking back your power.
Yeah. The practical exercise often involves writing a letter, which you never actually send, addressed to the younger, wounded version of yourself.
Yeah, to yourself.
To yourself. Validating their experience and essentially saying you did the absolute best you could with the knowledge and the tools you had at that time. When you release that need to keep punishing the past, you finally make space for the future.
That's a really powerful reframe.
Which actually sets us up perfectly for our final section, the future. We are already interacting daily with sophisticated conversational AI systems that are learning our language, our intent, and sometimes, even our emotional state.
It's happening fast.
So the big question is, does this technology ultimately enhance or erode our collective emotional intelligence?
Well, the potential for enhancement is significant, and we really should explore that first. AI could act as an unprecedented kind of emotional mirror.
How so?
Imagine journal apps that don't just record your thoughts, but use these large language models to spot subtle linguistic patterns. Patterns that might indicate increasing anxiety, or specific mood swings that maybe you yourself are overlooking.
That could dramatically normalize vulnerability, couldn't it? If an AI, like an emotional co-pilot, prompts you gently, saying, "Hey, I noticed your use of tentative language went up 20% this week. Want to unpack the source of that hesitation?"
That's a powerful, non-judgmental starting point right there.
Yeah.
It could also provide low-stakes practice. Think about a virtual therapist. It offers a safe space to rehearse difficult conversations or explore vulnerable feelings without that immediate fear of social judgment or feeling like you're burdening a friend.
Okay, that's the upside.
Yeah.
But the erosion risk, that feels absolutely real too.
It is. It's the risk of emotional atrophy. The danger lies if we start outsourcing our critical skills of human connection.
Yeah.
Meaning, if we default to texting a perfectly curated response generated by a bot, instead of doing the messy, awkward, but totally necessary work of calling a friend and actually hearing the tremor in their voice, we risk losing that crucial ability to navigate true human messiness. And connection is messy sometimes.
So the balance is absolutely key here. We need to use technology as a powerful diagnostic tool, perhaps, but not as a crutch to avoid the hard emotional work.
Precisely. If we use AI to spot our blind spots, great, we can then use that insight to improve our actual human-to-human connections. But we have to maintain the imperative. The source and application of empathy must remain human first.
Yeah.
Our emotional life is just too rich, too central to our humanity to outsource entirely. It's just not the same.
That feels like the perfect point to start wrapping up this deep dive. As we finish this exploration, my kind of mantra for you, the listener, is this. Resilience isn't armor. It's deep roots. Grow those roots. Learn to bend often when the wind hits, and you'll find you can weather pretty much any storm, big or small.
And adding to that, remember this. Empathy isn't weakness. It's probably your most powerful form of connection. Practice it daily with yourself. First, heal boldly when you need to and connect fiercely with others.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today.
And before you disconnect, maybe reflect on this one provocative thought, connecting our discussion of AI right back to your own self-awareness. If technology can already spot subtle patterns in your shifting moods, patterns hidden in your language, your habits, what is the most crucial emotional pattern that you might be choosing to ignore in yourself right now?
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking emotional intelligence EQ and really looking at it as a strategic tool set. We're definitely moving beyond just, knowing your feelings. Our mission here is to understand how emotions actually work as an engine for, high-stakes leadership, intense creativity, and those really big life-defining decisions. So we're focusing on application, not just like affirmation.
That's exactly right. That is precisely the mission. We've got enough source material now to really see that EQ isn't just some soft skill, It's genuinely the X factor. It separates the really competent people from the ones who are, pretty much unstoppable. And
right.
We can kind of put that old EQ versus IQ debate to rest. I mean, Daniel Goleman's finding is pretty stark. Emotional intelligence accounts for something like 80% of the difference between top performers and average ones in the workplace.
80%.
Yeah. So if you really want consistently outstanding results, you just have to master the human engine.
That completely reframes it, doesn't it? Makes EQ feel mandatory, not optional anymore. So what's the roadmap for this deep dive then? How are we structuring this?
Good question. We've got 4 key areas lined up.
Okay.
First, we'll tackle why EQ is just non-negotiable for leadership. We'll focus on this idea of emotional attunement. Second, we'll look at how emotions can fuel innovation, and importantly, the role mindfulness plays as a sort of control mechanism.
Okay. Leadership, then creativity, and mindfulness.
Exactly. Third, we'll dig into how emotions function as this powerful decision-making system, the gut GPS, as some call it. And finally, we'll broaden out. We'll look at how this kind of next-level EQ is really needed to navigate these huge modern shifts, stuff like hybrid work and even eco-anxiety.
Got it. Sounds like a comprehensive look. Where do we start? Leadership.
Yep, let's dive in there. Leadership. Look, for any leader, whether you're managing a global team or just leading a critical project, EQ isn't optional. It just isn't. Running things with that all-tactic, zero-heart approach, it guarantees one thing, really.
Yeah.
High turnover and just severe burnout every time. You see, the purely transactional leader, they only focus on the output. But the attuned leader, they focus on the mechanism producing that output, the people.
Okay, emotional attunement. I like the phrase, but let's make it practical. Because, for a lot of leaders under pressure, checking the vibes feels, a bit soft. Hard to justify spending time on that. What's the actual measurable ROI? How does attunement beat just hammering KPIs?
Right. The ROI question, it's efficiency and retention, fundamentally. But the way it works is subtle. Attunement lets a leader spot those little micro friction points before they snowball into existential problems for the team or the project.
So it's preventative.
Exactly. If you're only ever asking about KPIs, you only see the failure after it's already happened. Too late. But when you practice attunement, which means really observing body language, those subtle shifts in tone, picking up on underlying stressors, you uncover the small stuff, like the small resource block that's frustrating someone, or a minor conflict simmering between team members, or just that feeling someone has of being unseen, if you don't address that stuff, that employee starts polishing their resume.
So the check-in really changes. It's not just a performance review anymore. It's more like a diagnostic session.
Precisely.
You stop just asking, did you hit your numbers? And you start asking things like, what's really lighting you up right now? And maybe even more crucially, what's draining your energy?
You got it. And what's fascinating is how simple the action can be to start building this. So if you, listening right now or leading a meeting next time, try this. Just pause before you speak, scan the faces, don't jump right in. Observe the posture, the eye contact, the general energy. Sometimes just a simple empathetic nod acknowledging a struggle you sense someone might be having that can unlock a floodgate. You get genuine input that might solve a hidden problem you didn't even know existed.
So it's about creating space for that information to surface.
Yes. EQ is leading with a compass,
Yeah.
Gauging direction, feeling for true north. It's not leading with a hammer, just enforcing compliance.
Leading with a compass. I like that distinction.
Wow.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk creativity. This feels like a totally different application of emotion. Here, emotions aren't just about retention. They're maybe the actual spark for innovation. The sources talk about emotional alchemy. What's that about?
Emotional alchemy, yeah. It's this really powerful idea, a practice of taking heavy, difficult feelings.
Like frustration.
Frustration, deep disappointment, even, rage over something unfair or a creative block you just can't break, and channeling that raw energy directly into a breakthrough. History's full of examples. Think about Picasso's Blue Period. That wasn't painted in some calm, contemplative mood.
Right, that was grief, wasn't it?
Pure grief and anguish, yeah. Turned into something revolutionary. Artistic breakthrough born from pain.
Okay, but here's a critical point we need to address. How do we avoid just creating chaos? How do we make sure we're not just rewarding emotional volatility and calling it alchemy?
Right.
There's a really fine line, I think, between channeling productive rage and just, toxic behavior.
That's a crucial distinction, and the line is defined by structure and control. We are absolutely not advocating for throwing furniture around. Not at all. It's about disciplined transmutation. Harnessing the power without the mess means you have to contain it somehow.
Contain it how?
Well, the source material actually suggests a specific technique. They call it the rage room hack.
Okay, hold on. Are we talking about a literal room where you go break things?
Uh-huh.
Because those exist.
No, definitely not literal. It's a metaphor, a structured, figurative mental container. The hack is this. You set a strict timer, let's say 10 minutes. And for those 10 minutes, you just vent all your pure, unedited frustration onto paper, maybe into a voice recorder. No judgment, just get it all out. Then, the crucial part. When that timer goes off, you stop venting immediately and you pivot. You start asking only structured, constructive what-if questions related to the problem or the block.
So you're redirecting the energy.
Exactly. You use the force of that negative emotion, its power, but you channel it onto a creative canvas. The anger provides the fuel. The timer provides the discipline.
That makes a lot more sense. The structure is the key to avoiding the mess. And connecting all this leadership attunement, creative alchemy, the glue holding it together, seems to be mindfulness.
Absolutely. Mindfulness is essential.
Because without it, those strong emotions just hijack your rational brain, right? But with mindfulness, you're the one steering the ship.
Precisely. And the neuroscience here is really compelling. This isn't just some, woo-woo, feel-good practice anymore. Studies show meditation can actually physically thicken the gray matter in your prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex, that's the bit responsible for planning and...
Higher order functions, yeah. Planning, decision-making, and critically impulse control. It's like the brain's CEO.
Okay, so why does thickness matter? How does a thicker prefrontal cortex actually lead to better decisions when things get stressful?
Think of it like this. That thickness, which comes partly from more neural connections and better insulation called myelination, it creates a sort of longer runway, a cleaner signaling pathway. So when a strong emotional stimulus hits, frustration, anxiety, whatever that thicker cortex gives you more processing time, a bigger gap between the trigger and your reaction.
It buys you a fraction of a second.
Exactly, that critical fraction of a second to choose your response instead of just automatically reacting. That's the mechanism that lets you steer the emotional alchemy we were talking about.
Okay, some practical application again. If we're caught in that mid-chaos moment, feeling overwhelmed, what's the immediate mindfulness practice? The anchor.
The anchor breath, it's incredibly simple, totally discreet, and really effective. Just inhale deeply, maybe for a count of 4. Focus only on the physical feeling of the air filling your chest, your abdomen rising. Then exhale slowly, maybe for 4 again. Feel the release, that physical grounding sensation. Just do that 2 or 3 times when you feel yourself starting to spiral.
And that interrupts the panic response.
It disrupts that hijacked fight or flight pathway, helps clarify your thinking almost instantly.
Okay, decisions, which brings us nicely to the gut. This idea that emotions act as an internal gut GPS, and that ignoring it, well, we do that at our peril. Logic alone can be too cold, right?
Absolutely. True alignment, especially in really high-stakes decisions, it only happens when logic blends properly with what we often call the feels, that inner visceral sense, the hell yes or the hell no vibe check.
Yeah.
The sources are quite clear. Logic processes data very linearly, step by step. But the body's wisdom, it aggregates huge amounts of subconscious data, past experiences, pattern recognition, almost instantly.
Let's talk about that anecdote from the source material, the one about the difficult job offer. It illustrates this perfectly because the data, the pros and cons list, the salary, the title, everything on paper screamed yes. It looked like a slam dunk.
Right. Logically, it was a no-brainer.
But the body had a totally different reaction.
That's right. The person described this very specific physical feeling, their chest tightening up like a vice, a deep, immediate, somatic alarm bell ringing.
Wow.
And they listened to it, went against the spreadsheet, turned down the role, and later found out they'd basically dodged a bullet. It was a really toxic company culture, would have been miserable. The gut was synthesizing all this environmental data that the conscious mind just couldn't quite articulate yet.
Okay, well, this raises a really important question. How do we know the difference?
Yeah.
How do we distinguish between that genuine learned intuition, that inner oracle, and just, plain old anxiety? Or fear based on some past bad experience? Because the trap is relying only on logic or only on emotion, right?
That is the critical distinction, yes. And you learn to trust the gut, the reliable signals, by creating a feedback loop. The starting advice is simple. Journal after you make a decision. But to really refine it, you need to track your body's reaction at the time of the decision.
Okay, so be specific.
Yeah, write down, what did my body physically feel like right before I decided? Was it a tight chest? Light shoulders, nausea, a sense of expansion or excitement? Get specific. Then track the outcome. Did that physical feeling accurately predict how things turned out in the long run? Over time, doing this helps you build confidence. You start to recognize your authentic, high-value signals versus just background noise or fear.
You're essentially learning to decode your own internal language, turning physical sensations from just noise into reliable data points.
Precisely. And think about how powerful this is when you extend it to teams. Having diverse opinions is good, obviously, but diverse feelings, even those controlled emotional clashes we mentioned, they often lead to richer, more robust choices. But, and this is a big but it only works if the team has the collective EQ to navigate those clashes productively, to actually respect the gut feelings people bring to the table alongside the data.
That makes sense. Okay, let's widen the lens now for our final segment. Because these global shifts, modern life complexities, they seem to be demanding this kind of next-level EQ from pretty much everyone, not just people in formal leadership roles.
Absolutely. The world is throwing some really novel challenges our way, and they demand conscious emotional management skills from all of us.
Okay, challenge 1 you mentioned, hybrid work. We've all lived through this massive shift. The Zoom fatigue is real, right? The total blurring of boundaries between home and office. It leads to what some sources are calling emotional vertigo.
Yeah, that disorientation.
So we need solutions that actually foster real connection, even when we're looking at each other in little boxes on a screen.
Right. And the typical advice you hear is stuff like, do virtual vulnerability rounds, share one win, one wobble.
Yeah, I've heard that. Does it work?
Well, the critique is that it can easily become performative vulnerability. Like, people share something safe, not real, especially if there's no genuine psychological safety.
So what's the EQ-driven solution?
It's about creating small, intentionally safe microenvironments. And crucially, the leader has to go first. They need to share an actual wobble, not some sanitized, pre-approved learning experience, but a real challenge they're currently navigating.
Ah, okay, so they model actual vulnerability.
Exactly. That humanizes the grid. It proves through action that sharing a real struggle won't be punished or seen as weakness. That builds trust.
That feels like the key difference. If the manager shares, look, I'm really struggling with this deadline anxiety, it gives permission for a team member to admit, Yeah, I'm feeling totally overwhelmed by this boundary blur.
Precisely. The leader's EQ has to create the container, the safe space, for others to be honest about their emotional reality. That's the absolute prerequisite for trust and real collaboration when you're not physically together.
Okay, challenge 2 feels even bigger, maybe more pervasive. Climate action. The sources pointed out this sharp rise in eco-anxiety, polls showing, 70% of young people feeling profound dread about the future.
Yeah, it's massive. And this is actually a perfect large-scale example of where emotional alchemy is needed. Suppression, just trying to ignore those feelings of dread or anxiety, is absolutely the worst response. It just turns the anxiety inward, paralyzes you.
So what's the alternative?
The solution is recognizing that feeling, that fire, that anxiety, that's actually part of what forges the path forward.
Yeah.
We have to learn to channel that dread into what you might call a hopeful urgency.
Hopeful urgency. How does EQ help someone make that shift from feeling completely overwhelmed and paralyzed by the scale of the problem to finding a functional urgency that actually drives action?
You use the emotional energy itself, but you have to map it to small, manageable actions. Dread just says, the world is ending, there's nothing I can do, it's hopeless. Hopeful urgency says, okay, I am deeply concerned about this, I feel this anxiety, and therefore, I will dedicate 1 hour this week to joining that local green group. Or I'll research how to change this one specific consumption habit.
So you break it down.
You break it down, the anxiety gets transformed from this static internal pressure cooker into a dynamic external force driving small concrete steps. And crucially, when you take action, even small action, you shift the locus of control. It moves back towards you, which directly counteracts that feeling of helplessness.
So the anxiety is the fuel, but conscious manageable action is the output. You're steering the feeling.
Exactly. The source material is very clear on this. Actually feeling the anxiety, acknowledging it, is the necessary first step.
No.
If you can use your EQ to stay present with that difficult feeling without letting it completely paralyze you, then you can actually leverage its power.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what's the core takeaway? Where do we ultimately land on EQ?
I think the core manifesto is this. Emotions are not noise. They're not distractions to be ignored or suppressed. They are your most essential internal data stream. They're your North Star guiding you. We have to evolve with them, not fight against them. And if you can learn to deploy your emotions strategically, using attunement, alchemy, your gut GPS, all of it, you don't just, survive in this complex world. You can actually thrive.
That's a really powerful summary. Okay, for a final takeaway for you, our listener, let's boil it down to 3 things. Lead with heart, create from soul, decide with gut. Hopefully you now have some more advanced tools and perspectives to start integrating these ideas right away.
What really stands out to you from our discussion today?
For me, it's that idea we spent time on training your inner oracle. Consciously comparing your body's signals before a decision to the actual outcome later on. So here's a final thought, maybe a little experiment for you to explore this week, building directly on that. Identify one small decision you have coming up. Could be anything, prioritizing your tasks for tomorrow, maybe deciding on a small purchase, allocating budget for something. Before you actually commit, do the logical part. Gather the info, list the pros and cons, write them down if that helps. Then sit quietly for a moment. Ask your body what it says about the logical choice you're leaning towards. And try to specifically identify the physical sensation. Is it a tightness, a lightness, a warmth, a knot in your stomach? Then go ahead and make the decision, probably the logical one. But make a note of that physical signal you registered. What initial physical information did you gather before you chose? And then over the next few days or weeks, check back. Did that signal turn out to be reliable? Was it telling you something useful? Just something to think about as you go forward. Keep diving deep.